Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Good to be here.
Today, I want to try something a little different. Usually we start with a problem, like why is the economy crashing, or how does AI actually learn? And we try to solve it.
Right, we look for an answer.
Exactly. But today, I want to start with a feeling.
A feeling. That's a new one for us.
Yeah, that feeling of, well, the spark, the pull. You walk into a room, you see someone across the way, and suddenly your logical brain just goes offline and your body sort of takes over.
The chemistry. That's what we call it, right? Chemistry.
We call it chemistry, we call it romance, we call it love, we write songs about it, we start wars over it. But today, we're going to peel back the curtain and look at the machinery underneath that feeling.
So we are going to ruin the romance, basically. Is that the plan?
Maybe a little. Or maybe we're going to deepen it. I don't know. We're looking at the absolute microscopic chemical bedrock of desire. We're asking, is attraction a choice?
Or is it a soulmate connection?
Is it that? Or is it just a command from a gene sequence that was written, a million years ago?
It really is the ultimate question of free will, isn't it? I mean, are we choosing our partners, or are we just acting out a very, very old script? A script written by our ancestors to ensure the survival of the species?
That's the question.
Yeah.
And to get at it, we have pulled together a really unusual stack of sources. We aren't just looking at one book or one perspective. We are looking at three distinct layers of this conversation.
Right. I like to think of it as an archaeological dig. We've got the surface layer, which is, the pop culture layer. This is what everyone thinks is true about sex and history.
All the internet arguments, the conventional wisdom.
Exactly. Then we dig a little deeper to the biology layer, the actual hormones, the plumbing, the wetware that makes the whole system run.
And then we get to the bottom layer, the bedrock.
Yes, the theoretical layer. And this is the exciting part for me. We have a fascinating, dense, really cutting-edge academic paper that proposes a theory that might just flip our entire understanding of sexual orientation on its head.
So just to recap, we're going from internet debates to hormone receptors all the way down to the secret switches on your DNA.
That is the plan. And I think by the end of this, you are not going to look at a first date or even look in a mirror the same way again.
Okay, let's start with that first layer, the surface. We spent a lot of time combing through reader communities online, specifically looking at these big science of sex threads on Reddit. And what struck me immediately was just the hunger. People are desperate to know why they behave the way they do.
It makes total sense. Sex is one of the most powerful drives we have, yet for most of us, it's often the most confusing. It's this black box. People want a manual.
They want to know if their desires are normal or natural. That word comes up a lot.
And they're often looking for justification for how they feel, right? Which leads directly into these massive, sprawling debates about evolutionary psychology. Yeah. And this is, as you said, our first battlefield.
It really is, because on one hand, you have people recommending books like Bonk by Mary Roach.
Which is a fantastic book.
Oh, it's great. It's funny. It's very lab-based. It's about the science of what happens to our bodies during sex.
Right. Mary Roach is kind of the gold standard for making science fun and accessible. But she sticks to the mechanics. She asks, what happens physically when we do X? She doesn't necessarily ask the bigger question of, why did we evolve to want to do X in the first place?
Exactly. And that's where you get the other camp, the Ivpsych camp. And this is where the knives come out.
Yeah.
The biggest debate we saw, and it was everywhere, was the battle between two specific books with very similar titles, Sex at Dawn and Sex at Dusk.
Oh, the classic showdown. This is basically the Godzilla versus Kong of popular evolutionary anthropology. If you hang out in these circles online, you pretty much have to pick a side.
So for anyone listening who hasn't gone down this particular rabbit hole, let's paint the picture. What is the argument that Sex at Dawn is selling? Because it seems to have a massive, passionate fan base.
So Sex at Dawn, which was written by Christopher Ryan and Casilda Jetha, was a cultural phenomenon when it came out a while back. And frankly, it became a phenomenon because it told a lot of people exactly what they wanted to hear.
Which is?
The central thesis is that humans are not naturally monogamous, that our modern struggles with jealousy and infidelity aren't a personal failing. They're a result of us being forced into a social structure that goes against our fundamental nature.
Which is a massive relief to anyone who has ever been in a long-term relationship and felt the itch to stray. It's basically a scientific permission slip.
Precisely. They argue that the standard narrative, that one man and one woman bonded for life to raise kids, is a relatively recent myth. They say it was imposed on us by the advent of agriculture and private property.
So what was life like before farming, according to them?
They argue that for 99% of our history as a species, we lived in these hypersocial, fiercely egalitarian hunter-gatherer tribes. And in these tribes, everything was shared: food, shelter, childcare,
And sex.
and sex. They paint this picture of a world where paternity wasn't really a concept. No one knew for sure who the dad was, so every man in the group had a vested interest in protecting every child. It reduces conflict. If everyone belongs to everyone, there's no sexual jealousy, there are no wars over women.
It sounds like a utopia almost, like a prehistoric commune, a bonobo paradise.
And that is the exact animal they latch onto, the bonobo. They're one of our closest relatives, along with chimpanzees, and they are famously matriarchal, and they solve almost all social tension with sex. It's their handshake, their currency, their conflict resolution tool.
So Ryan and Jetha basically say, look at the bonobo. That's our true nature. Civilization came along and ruined us by forcing us into these little boxes called nuclear families.
That's the core of the Dawn argument. Monogamy is a prison. Promiscuity is our natural ancestral state. It's very romantic, in a countercultural way.
It is. But then you look at the comments in our source thread, and for every person recommending it, there's another person practically screaming, read Sex at Dusk, it's the rebuttal.
Right. Sex at Dusk by Lynn Saxon is the buzzkill, but it's a necessary one. Saxon comes in and argues that Sex at Dawn is largely a fantasy, a modern projection of our own desires onto the past.
So how does she rebut it? What's her main point?
She points out that while we are related to bonobos, we are also equally related to chimpanzees.
And chimps are, not hippies.
No, not at all. Chimps are incredibly violent, they're patriarchal, hierarchical, and intensely possessive and jealous. If a female chimp mates with a rival male, it often ends very, very badly for her.
So Saxon argues that Sex at Dawn just cherry-picks the primate that fits their narrative?
Exactly. They ignore the chimp in the room. Saxon's argument is that if you look at the actual anthropological evidence, from almost every recorded hunter-gatherer society we can observe today, some form of pair bonding is the norm.
So the idea of the free love commune might just be wishful thinking.
It might be. Saxon argues that pair bonding, and look, it's not always strict, puritanical, lifelong monogamy, but the tendency to form strong, preferential attachments is a deeply ingrained human trait. We fall in love, we get jealous, we protect our partners. These aren't just cultural inventions, they seem to be part of our biological settings.
One of the commenters in the thread made a really sharp point. They said that Sex at Dawn is dangerous because it presents speculation as fact. It uses the authority of science to sell an idea that the actual academic community has, largely rejected.
And that really is the danger of pop evolutionary psychology in general. It's what scientists call the just so story problem. Like the Rudyard Kipling stories, how the leopard got his spots. You look at a modern behavior, the men liking expensive sports cars, and you invent a plausible-sounding prehistoric reason for it. Oh, men like fast, shiny cars because they used to have to be fast runners with shiny pelts to catch mates on the savannah.
It sounds good, it makes a certain kind of sense, but you can't prove it. There's no way to test it.
Exactly. And you can usually find a just-so story to back up whatever you want to believe. If you want to justify cheating, you point to the bonobos. If you want to justify possessiveness, you point to the chimps. It becomes a sort of scientific Rorschach test.
So this first source, the voice of the people, it gives us this massive unresolved contradiction. One side says we are hardwired to sleep around. The other side says we are hardwired to pair up.
Which tells us something important. It tells us that we can't solve this riddle by just looking at history books or engaging in these philosophical debates. We need to go deeper.
We need to stop guessing about what cavemen did.
And start looking at what is actually happening inside the human body right now.
Okay, let's do that. Let's leave the battlefield of psychology and step into the laboratory. Let's move to our second source, Dr. Sharon Mohamed's book, How Sex Works.
This is where we get into the nuts and bolts, the machinery.
Yeah.
If we strip away all the cultural debates about monogamy versus polyamory, what is the biological engine actually trying to accomplish?
And Mohamed's pretty clear on this. The engine has one prime directive: genetic diversity.
That is the golden rule of sexual reproduction. It's the whole point.
Okay, but help me understand this because it's a fundamental question. If the goal is just to make more of me, to pass on my genes. Why do I need a partner at all? Why can't I just clone myself? There are animals that do that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Asexual reproduction is way more efficient on the surface.
Yeah.
You don't need to spend energy finding a mate. You don't need to go on dates. You don't risk rejection or disease. You just split in two. Simple.
So what's the catch?
The catch is that it's like putting all of your money into a single stock.
If the stock crashes, you lose everything.
You're wiped out. If I clone myself, my clone has all my strengths, but it also has all my weaknesses. If a new virus comes along that has the key to my particular immune system, it kills me, and it kills my clone. Game over for our entire lineage.
But sex shuffles the deck.
Sex shuffles the deck. You take half your genes, your partner takes half of theirs, you mix them together, and you create a brand new, unique combination that has never existed before.
Right.
The virus that had the key to your lock won't necessarily have the key to your child's lock.
So sex is basically an insurance policy against extinction.
That is the unromantic but biologically accurate way to put it. We are in a constant arms race with parasites and viruses. They're evolving to crack our codes, and we're using sex to constantly change the codes. It's a process called the Red Queen hypothesis. We have to run as fast as we can just to stay in the same place.
Okay. And to get us to buy that insurance policy, because let's be honest, finding a mate is a lot of hard work. Evolution has equipped us with a very, very potent chemical cocktail.
A cocktail that basically hijacks your brain and makes you do its bidding.
Let's run through the main ingredients, starting with the big one, the one everyone thinks they know, testosterone.
Testosterone is the fuel. It's the accelerator pedal for desire. And it's really important to clarify something here, because this is a huge misconception. Testosterone is the primary driver of libido in both men and women.
Right, we usually think of it as the male hormone.
And men do have much higher levels of it, for sure. In men, it does a lot of heavy lifting regarding behavior. Higher concentrations are linked to the drive for competition, for status seeking, for risk taking. And biologically, this makes a lot of sense. If you're a male in a species where females select mates based on fitness or resources, you need a chemical that pushes you to climb the social ladder.
But women need it too, for desire.
Absolutely. A woman's libido is highly dependent on testosterone. Without it, or with very low levels, desire flatlines. It is the go signal for sexual interest in everyone, regardless of gender.
Okay, so that's the gas pedal. What about the other big one, estrogen?
If testosterone is the gas, estrogen is more like the conductor of the orchestra, or maybe the scheduler. It's the primary hormone that orchestrates the female reproductive cycle. But here's where it gets really interesting regarding attraction.
Go on.
Moelim notes that women often experience heightened desire and are perceived by others as more attractive during the phases of their cycle when estrogen is at its peak.
And this is right around ovulation.
Exactly. The body is incredibly smart. It basically says, okay, the egg is released, the window for conception is open, let's amp up all the signals and make this happen. Studies have shown women's voices can raise in pitch slightly, their skin can appear more radiant, and their own sexual desire spikes. It's a beautifully coordinated marketing campaign run by the ovaries.
So testosterone gets you interested, estrogen sets the schedule, but then there is the third major player, the one that gets all the good press these days, oxytocin.
The cuddle chemical,
Yeah.
or the love hormone.
Is that branding accurate? Or is that just, pop science marketing?
It's a bit of simplification, but it's largely accurate. Oxytocin is a neuropeptide that is released during moments of physical intimacy. We're talking hugging, kissing, and then a massive flood of it during orgasm. Its primary function seems to be fostering trust, attachment, and bonding.
But why do we even need that? I mean, lizards don't cuddle. They mate and they leave.
Lizards also don't raise their young for 18 years. That's the key difference. Human babies are incredibly helpless for an incredibly long time. They are born, as some anthropologists say, about a year uncooked compared to other animals. You need a powerful chemical glue to keep the parents together, or at the very least to keep the mother intensely bonded to the infant, long enough to ensure that helpless offspring survives.
So oxytocin is the trap.
I call it the anchor. Testosterone gets you into the bed. Oxytocin is what makes you want to stay for breakfast and maybe, stick around for the next 2 decades. It cements the pair bond.
Okay, so we have this chemical soup driving our basic urges. But here's the part of Moelim's work that always blows my mind. We think we're choosing our partners based on conscious preferences. Oh, he has a nice smile, or she has a great sense of humor. We think we're making these high-level aesthetic choices.
But we aren't. Not really. Our conscious mind is just the press secretary. The real decisions are being made in the basement by these ancient biological systems. We are constant data processors picking up on secret signals.
Let's talk about the smell thing, the pheromones, because I remember reading about the sweaty T-shirt experiments years ago and thinking it had to be an urban legend.
Nope, it's very real science. And it's all about something called the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC.
Okay, that is a mouthful. You have to break that down for us.
Okay, so your MHC genes are a set of genes that control your immune system. They're like the bouncers at the club of your body, determining which pathogens get recognized and kicked out.
Hmm.
Everyone has a slightly different set of MHC genes.
So what was the experiment?
In the classic study, they had a group of men wear plain cotton T-shirts for a couple of days. No deodorant, no cologne, just their natural body odor. Then they put each shirt in a box and had women smell the shirts and rate them for attractiveness.
Which sounds like a nightmare focus group, by the way.
I can't imagine. But the results were stunningly consistent. Over and over again, women were overwhelmingly attracted to the smell of men who had different MHC genes from their own.
So we literally sniff out genetic compatibility.
They do. And think about the brilliant evolutionary logic behind it. If you mate with someone who has the same immune system profile as you, your kid just gets a duplicate of your defenses. It has the same blind spots. But if you mate with someone who has a different set of immune genes, your kid gets a much broader, more diverse arsenal. They're potentially resistant to a wider range of diseases.
It is absolutely wild to think that while you're on a first date trying to think of something witty to say about the wine, your immune system is basically interviewing their immune system under the table.
And it's making critical decisions before you've even ordered an appetizer. Smell, symmetry, skin quality, these are all proxies for genetic fitness that we're assessing constantly, whether we know it or not.
Okay, so that is the standard model. Boy meets girl, hormones fire, immune systems shake hands, they make a baby with a super immune system. The species continues. It's a perfect, elegant machine.
It is. Until you look at the data that doesn't fit the model, the exceptions to the rule.
And this brings us to the big puzzle. The source that I was personally most excited to dig into. The academic paper by Rice, Freiberg, and Gavrilets titled Homosexuality as a Consequence of Epigenetically Canalized Sexual Development.
Quite a title.
It is, but on the surface, everything we just said about evolutionary success seems to crash into a wall when we start to talk about homosexuality.
This is what is known as the Darwinian paradox.
Can you state the paradox for us as clearly as possible?
Okay, so if the primary, and some would say only, goal of biology from an evolutionary perspective is to pass on your genes to the next generation, then exclusive homosexuality looks like a dead end. If an individual is exclusively attracted to the same sex, they are not, by definition, reproducing directly. They're not passing their DNA to offspring.
So, by simple Darwinian logic, survival of the fittest, the traits that lead to more offspring out natural selection should have weeded this out.
Exactly. Any trait that significantly reduces reproduction should, in theory, disappear from the gene pool very, very quickly. If a gazelle is born with a trait that makes it run 50% slower, it gets eaten by a lion, and it doesn't pass on the slow-running gene.
But homosexuality hasn't disappeared.
Not at all. It's persistent. It's been present in every culture throughout recorded history. The paper we're looking at cites a prevalence of around 8% when you include bisexual behavior. And crucially, it runs in families.
That familial part is key, isn't it? It tells us there's a biological component here. It's not just a lifestyle choice or a modern cultural trend, as some people argue.
Right, there's a heritable component. So for decades, evolutionary biologists have been scrambling to solve this puzzle. They needed to find the hidden benefit. Why does nature keep this trait around?
And one of the most popular early theories was kin selection.
The gay uncle theory, or as you called it, the gunkle theory.
Right. Explain that.
The idea was, well, maybe gay individuals, by not having children of their own, are free to invest resources, time, food, protection in their close relatives, like their nieces and nephews. By helping their siblings' kids survive and thrive, they're ensuring that some of their shared genes get passed on to the next generation.
It sounds plausible. It's a nice story. Does it hold up?
The math just doesn't work. The paper dismisses this pretty clearly. To make up for the evolutionary cost of not having your own child, you would need to help your sister have something like 2 extra children that she would not have had otherwise. The helper effect just isn't strong enough in humans to explain the persistence of the trait at these levels.
So if it's not kin selection, what about a gay gene? Did they ever find a specific switch on the DNA that causes it?
They looked. My God, did they look. For years, they've done these massive genome-wide association studies scanning the DNA of hundreds of thousands of people, and they found, well, nothing. Or rather, they found noise. There was no single gay gene. There are no consistent DNA polymorphisms, specific changes in the ATCG code itself that act as a smoking gun.
And this is where the twins come in, right? Because this specific data point seems to be the hinge of the entire argument in this paper.
It is the smoking gun that points away from a simple genetic explanation.
That guy's
So let's
really...
be really clear about this. Identical twins share 100% of their DNA. They are, for all intents and purposes, natural clones.
So if homosexuality were purely genetic, like, say, eye color.
Then if one identical twin was gay, the other twin should be gay nearly 100% of the time. If I have blue eyes, my identical twin has blue eyes. The code is the same.
But that is not what the data says at all.
Not even close. The concordance rate for homosexuality in identical twins is only about 20%.
Wait, say that again? Only 20%.
Depending on the specific study, it ranges a bit, but it's
Right.
consistently low. Now, that's much higher than the prevalence in the general population, so it tells you there is some genetic link, but it's nowhere near 100%. And this is a huge, huge clue. It means that 80% of the time, two individuals with the exact same DNA have different sexual orientations.
So it cannot be the hardware. The DNA hardware is identical. It has to be the software. Or maybe the operating system that reads the hardware.
Enter epigenetics.
Okay, we absolutely need to define epigenetics carefully here because it's a buzzword that gets thrown around and misused a lot.
Right. The simplest analogy I've heard is this. Think of your DNA as a giant library of instruction manuals. The text written in the books is your genome. That text doesn't change. Epigenetics are the sticky notes, the highlights, the bookmarks, and the paperclips attached to the pages. They don't change the words in the book, but they tell the reader, which is the cell, read this paragraph loudly, or skip this entire chapter, or do not open this page until you get another signal. They control how the genes are expressed.
So two people can have the exact same book, the same DNA, but if they have different sticky notes, different epigenetics, their cells will follow different instructions and build different things.
Precisely. These are called epimarks. They're the switches that turn genes on and off. And what Rice, Freiberg, and Gavrilis have built is a comprehensive model that says homosexuality is caused by these switches, these epimarks, not by the underlying genes themselves.
And their theory involves a central concept they call canalization, which sounds like city planning, but I'm guessing it's about biology.
It's a brilliant metaphor, actually. Imagine you're bowling. Your goal is to get the ball to go straight down the lane and hit the pins. Hitting the pins represents successful sexual development, in this case becoming a typical reproductive male or a typical reproductive female.
Okay, simple enough.
But the bowling lane of fetal development is bumpy. It's not a perfect environment. The floor might be uneven, there might be a draft. In biology, we call this developmental noise. Hormone levels fluctuate wildly, temperatures can change. The mother might get sick or stressed.
So with all that noise, how do you ensure the ball still hits the pins? How do you ensure development stays on track?
You put up the bumpers, those gutter bumpers that kids use. That is canalization. It creates a canal that helps force the ball to go straight. Even if it gets knocked around a bit, it buffers development against noise.
So in the developing fetus, hitting the pins means developing the right body and the right brain for your chromosomal sex.
Correct. And this is where the paper fundamentally challenges the old way of thinking about sexual development. The old view, it's called the Jost paradigm, was very simple. High testosterone in the womb equals male. Low testosterone equals female.
More gas equals more speed. Very straightforward.
Right. But the researchers looked at the actual data and said, it's not that simple. Testosterone levels in developing fetuses are actually really messy. There are specific windows during pregnancy when a female fetus can have just as much testosterone floating around as a male fetus.
So if it was just about the amount of the hormone, you'd have chaos, you'd have females developing male characteristics and vice versa all the time. It would be a total mess.
Exactly. So the developing fetus needs a way to filter the signal. It needs a volume knob for its sensitivity to that signal. And these volume knobs, according to the theory, are the epigenetic bumpers.
Break that down for me. How does the bumper, the volume knob, work for a boy versus a girl?
Okay, let's take an XY fetus, a genetic male. To develop properly as a male, that fetus needs to be hypersensitive to testosterone. It needs to amplify the signal, so it has an epimark, a sticky note, that essentially says, turn the volume on your testosterone receptors up to 11. Even if the testosterone level dips for a bit, listen closely and keep building a penis.
And the female fetus?
An XX fetus, a genetic female, needs the opposite. It needs to be hyposensitive. It has to blunt the signal. It has an epimark that says, put the earplugs in. Mute the testosterone signal. Even if there's a big spike from the mother's adrenals or somewhere else, ignore it and stay on the female track.
So it's not just about how much testosterone is in the tank, it's about how thirsty the engine is for it.
Precisely. These epimarks are the canalization bumpers. They ensure that boys and girls turn out girls, even with all the hormonal noise in the womb. They're a critical safety mechanism for development.
Okay, I think I'm following. This explains standard, typical development. But how does this get us to homosexuality? Where is the glitch in the system?
The glitch is in what the paper calls carryover. See, usually these crucial epimarks are supposed to be erased between generations. When you make sperm or eggs, your body's supposed to wipe the slate clean. You don't pass your sticky notes to your kids. You're only supposed to pass the book itself.
Usually. I hear a big usually there.
Usually. But the core of the theory is that sometimes the erasure process isn't 100% perfect. Sometimes a particularly strong epimark escapes erasure and gets carried over to the child. Let's play out scenario A.
Okay, scenario A.
You have a father. To be a successful, robust, reproductively fit male, he likely developed under the influence of very strong masculinizing epimarks. His body was very, very good at listening to testosterone. That's a good thing for him. It helped him compete and find a mate and have children.
Right, so he's got the volume 11 switch, and it works great for him.
It works great for him. Now, he creates a sperm. That sperm carries his XY chromosome. But by accident, it also carries that volume 11 sticky note that was never properly erased. He then conceives a daughter. She is genetically XX.
Okay, so she's genetically female, but she's got this leftover instruction from her dad.
Yes. She has inherited her father's be hypersensitive to testosterone switch. Now, her genitals and most of her body develop as female because that process is very heavily canalized and happens at different times. But her brain, specifically the part of the brain that governs sexual preference, which develops later and is more plastic.
It reads the sticky note.
It reads the sticky note. Her brain becomes hypersensitive to the androgens, the testosterone, that are naturally present in her system. Her brain's sexual circuitry gets masculinized. So she grows up with a brain that is oriented sexually, like a male's. She's attracted to females.
Wow, okay, so she is running her dad's attraction software on her female hardware, all because of a switch that didn't get turned off before it was passed down.
That is the theory in a nutshell. And it works perfectly in the other direction, too. Scenario B, a mother. Let's say she is very fertile, very feminine in the biological sense. She has strong epimarks that tell her cells to ignore testosterone. She passes that earplug switch to her son.
So the son is XY. He's producing testosterone, but his brain has his mom's earplugs in.
Correct. His developing brain is now resistant to the masculinizing push of his own testosterone, specifically in the circuits related to attraction. His brain's sexual preference is feminized. As a result, he grows up to be attracted to males.
This is genuinely blowing my mind. It completely reframes the whole question. It's not a mutation or a defect.
No. And this is why the researchers use the term sexually antagonistic epimarks.
Explain that term, sexually antagonistic.
It means a trait, or in this case an epimark, that is beneficial to one sex but is reproductively costly if it happens to end up in the other sex.
I see.
Evolution keeps these powerful epimarks around because they are usually incredibly helpful. That father's masculinizing mark made him a more virile male. That mother's feminizing mark made her a more fertile female. They are fitness enhancing. The cost of having them is that occasionally they slip through the erasure process to the opposite sex offspring and cause homosexuality.
So under this theory, homosexuality is an unavoidable side effect of the very mechanism that keeps the rest of us straight and reproductively typical.
That is a very profound and accurate way to put it. It is the cost of doing business for sexual dimorphism. In order to have distinctly different men and women, evolution needs these strong developmental filters. And sometimes those filters end up in the wrong hands.
This feels like it explains so much, but is there any actual evidence to back it up? Or is this just a really clever, elegant math model? Because, I can write a model that says aliens did it, but that doesn't make it true.
It's currently a model, but it's a model that fits all the weird, contradictory existing data better than anything else we've ever had. Let's go back and look at the evidence they cite.
Right.
First, remember the twin data, the 20% concordance rate.
Right. How does this epigenetic model explain that?
Because epigenetic marks are malleable. They're soft inheritance, not hard inheritance like DNA. They can be erased or modified or even created anew during fetal development by random environmental factors in the womb. So both identical twins might inherit the gay mark from their parent. But in one twin, during the chaotic environment of the womb, maybe one placenta got a slightly better blood flow, maybe one twin was positioned differently, the mark gets scrubbed off or ignored. In the other twin, it sticks.
So they have the exact same DNA, but different outcomes because of random noise in the epigenetic machinery during development. That perfectly explains the 80% difference,
Exactly. It also explains a phenomenon called gonad trait discordance.
which is just fancy scientific talk for the genitals don't always match the brain's preferences.
Right. The theory explains why a person can be perfectly physically male, normal levels of testosterone, normal genitalia, everything works, but have a feminized sexual preference. It's because the different systems, genitals versus brain, develop at different times and have different levels of canalization, different bumpers.
Yeah.
The brain is more plastic. It's more susceptible to these later-acting epigenetic shifts than the penis or the ovaries are.
It's not one single sex switch that gets flipped. It's a whole cascade of different switches at different times.
A whole cascade. And they point to other conditions that fit this model perfectly, like hypospadias and cryptorchidism conditions, where male genital development is incomplete. Like homosexuality, these conditions run in families, but they also have low twin concordance, and no single gene has been found. They are almost certainly epigenetic in origin.
But the most compelling piece of evidence for me, the one that really made me sit up and go, whoa, was the connection to fertility, the fecundity connection.
Yes, this is the big aha moment for solving the Darwinian paradox. This is the key.
So what's the connection?
Critics of any biological theory of homosexuality always ask the same question. If being gay stops you from reproducing, why hasn't the gene for it died out?
Right.
The paper points to multiple studies showing that the female relatives of gay men, especially on the mother's side, tend to have more children than the average. They are more fecund.
Which seems completely counterintuitive. If there's a gay factor running in the family, you'd think overall reproduction would go down, not up.
Not if you accept the sexually antagonistic epimark theory. Think it through. If a gay man is gay because he inherited a strong, feminizing ignore testosterone switch from his mom, what does that very same switch do for his mom and his aunts and his sisters?
Well, it makes them more resistant to testosterone. It protects their femaleness.
Exactly. It might make them what we'd call hyperfeminine, it might make them reproduce earlier, or be slightly more fertile, or be perceived as more attractive to mates. The very same epigenetic factor that causes a reproductive cost in the son causes a reproductive bonus in the mother and other female relatives.
So the epimark, or the tendency to create it, survives and spreads because it's so successful in the women that it more than makes up for the reproductive loss in the men.
It balances the evolutionary books. Evolution doesn't care about the individual. It's a game of statistics. If the sisters and mothers of gay men have, say, 20% more kids, that can mathematically cover the loss of the brother having 0. The trait is maintained in the population because, on average, it's beneficial.
That is an incredibly elegant explanation. It connects all the dots. The heritability, the persistence, the twin data, the fertility data. It's all just volume knobs being turned up too high or too low and passed down accidentally.
And the authors make some very bold, testable predictions based on this. They essentially say, stop looking for the gay gene. You won't find one major gene because it doesn't exist. But they predict that as our technology gets better, we will be able to screen the epigenome of sperm and eggs.
And if they're right, what would we see?
Potentially, we might be able to identify these carryover marks. We might see that the sperm of fathers who go on to have gay daughters has a distinct epigenetic profile, a lingering masculinizing signature that didn't get properly wiped clean during its formation.
That would be a game changer for science. It would take this from a beautiful theory to an established fact.
It would completely validate the epigenetic view of human development. It would prove that we pass on more than just our DNA code. We pass on the instructions for how to read the code, and sometimes those instructions get smudged.
So where does this leave us? We've covered a huge amount of ground here. We started with those Reddit debates about whether we're all naturally promiscuous bonobos or intensely jealous chimps.
Then we move through the hormonal machinery of lust, the testosterone gas pedal, and the immune system smell test.
And we ended up deep in the epigenetic programming of the fetus, with these ghost-in-the-machine switches flipping things around.
I think the synthesis here, the way to bring it all together, is that sexual desire is not a simple choice. And it's not a simple hardwired switch like a light bulb. It's a symphony.
A symphony. Explain that.
Yeah. You have the evolutionary pressure. That's the sheet music written by natural selection. That's the ancient drive for genetic diversity we talked about with Molam. Then you have the instruments. That's the hormones, testosterone, estrogen, oxytocin, all playing the notes.
Okay.
But then you have the conductor, and the conductor is the epigenome. And the conductor is interpreting that sheet music based on notes and highlights left over from the last performance, the performance of your parents' own development.
It really takes the moralizing and the judgment out of it, doesn't it? I mean, looking back at those Reddit threads, there's so much judgment. Is it wrong to be polyamorous? Is homosexuality unnatural? But when you realize that someone's sexual orientation might just be a chemical echo of their father's high testosterone sensitivity, it just makes the human experience feel so much more interconnected and, I don't know, less black and white.
It does. It suggests that we are literally physically shaped by the survival strategies of our direct ancestors. Not just their genes, but by how their bodies used those genes. Your dad needed a certain epigenetic setting to survive and thrive in his environment, and you might be carrying the echo of that survival strategy.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me, and this is something for you listening to think about. We always ask ourselves the question, who am I? As if we're these independent, self-created islands. We think our desires are uniquely ours, born from our own experiences. But if this theory holds up, your deepest, most fundamental desires, the people you fall in love with, the chemistry you feel, the very structure of your attraction, might be a survival mechanism from a generation ago, a biological ghost living on inside you.
We are, in a very real and tangible biological sense, the continuation of our parents' stories.
Yeah.
We're the sequel, and we've inherited some of their stage directions.
A chemical echo. I love that phrasing. So the next time you feel that spark of attraction for someone, that inexplicable pull, just remember, there is a lot of history and a lot of biology lighting that fire.
And maybe a few sticky notes on your DNA that refuse to fall off.
Exactly. Thanks for diving deep with us. Stay curious, and we will see you on the next one.